Hello, everyone. We are excited to share an Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation project that demonstrates the possibilities of coordinating and collaborating to prospectively collect monographs that can be shared across our institutions. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear more about the organization of Ivy Plus Libraries, referred to as IPLC, how we structured ourselves to work on this project, and you'll also notice some swirly images throughout our slides. These swirls represent the institutions of IPLC. Each one is unique and lovely in its own way. Sometimes the swirls just complement one another, but move in different directions. And sometimes they move together to create a beautiful wave. So this is a story of finding ways to move together.
Hello, I'm Gladriel Chilton, the Director of Collections Initiatives for IPLC. Thank you so much for joining us today. IPLC's logo is purple, black, and white. Purple because not only is it a nice color, but also because it is not one of the school colors of a member institution. It's also a combination, or a swirling, if you will, of several of the institution's colors, red and blue. The mission of IPLC is to benefit current and future scholars globally by maximizing the benefits of the members' collective assets to collect, preserve, and provide access to information resources in support of teaching, learning, and research at the member universities. Additionally, IPLC seeks to exercise collaborative leadership in helping to shape both discourse around scholarly communication and the outcomes of that discourse. I work primarily with IPLC's Collection Development Group, and over the past 8 years, we've worked to intentionally cultivate the community and relationships to enable collaboration, including development of norms and processes that are a key part of the group's governance and function. In this presentation, Sarah and I will be illustrating how this project exemplifies aspects of some of our norms.
And I'm Sarah Betting. I'm representing 3 colors in the slide deck, or wearing 3 different hats. I am representing Stanford University, where I head up the Acquisitions and Collection Services Department. I'm also a member of the IPLC Collection Development Group and a member of a subgroup committee on collaborative collection development. So we are going to tell you more about these groups in a minute. But first, we'll say a little bit more about IPLC and the outline of our story. So our idea was simple. What we wanted to do was implement an approval plan that auto-shipped copies of selected print books to designated libraries. But our organization is complex in that we are decentralized, with IPLC initiatives and projects primarily being run by volunteer members. So our presentation will take you through a high seas adventure story of finding ways to uphold local needs while also trying to move together. So while the premise of our story is how we built a shared approval plan, the moral of our story is that we needed a lot of trust building and governance process creation in order to execute a coordinated approach. We have a set of meeting norms that I'll be referring to on purple slides throughout the presentation. These keep us grounded and remind us that it's okay to swirl in different directions, and that sometimes swirling together can be uncomfortable. We have lots of different needs and competing priorities, but our commitment is to prioritize relationships with one another and keep finding ways to move forward. And there are a lot of us. Between our 13 institutions, there are around 4,600 library staff, all swirling in different ways across 3 different time zones. Our institutions are on lands that have been stewarded by Indigenous peoples and nations. On the right side are names of the 13 institutions, and on the left are the Indigenous tribes and nations that stewarded campus lands prior to colonization. Let's pause and acknowledge these people, tribes, and nations. I'd like to also acknowledge Galadriel's late colleague Kenya Flash for her work in researching the history of these lands. Thank you.
This is IPLC's organizational chart at the moment. We have a library directors group with a library directors executive team, a program steering group, and then we have the collection development group, resource access and strategic sharing group, a scholarly communications group, technical services group, assessment group, and IT group, all managing different things and with different levels of engagement across the partnership. We're going to focus in this presentation on the collection development group and collaborative collection work. You'll see that under the collection development group, there's a web collecting advisory committee, a standing committee on collaborative print collection management, and a standing committee for collaborative collection development. We have 5 staff in IPLC, myself, as well as Miranda Seiler and Emily Irachima for the Collection Development Group's web collecting program, and Jenny Boyer and James Robinson for resource sharing and discovery, as well as managing Borrow Direct. The Collection Development Group has 3 areas of focus. Collaborative collection development, which we'll be focusing on today, is one of these areas. We also have had initiatives related to collaborative print management and scholarly communications advocacy. The Standing Committee on Collaborative Collection Development was charged to be a group that incubates ideas and oversees projects related to prospective collection development. The Standing Committee is made up of representatives from 4 of the primary groups in IPLC: the Collection Development Group, Resource Access and Strategic Sharing, Assessment, and Technical Services. The committee can take ideas to or bring ideas from collection development. The goal of having multiple perspectives from the collection lifecycle is to think through impacts and viability of any project before a project team is charged. We also needed a standing committee to be able to provide oversight for projects that we undertake, such as this one we're talking about today. This chart shows where a project team is situated in our organization. The project we will be discussing is an 18-month pilot to create a coordinated print collection plan with one English language publisher. To put it slightly differently, we wanted to test out a shared vendor-managed approval plan, and we wanted to test it out with one publisher. Our process was to set up a pop-up organization with a governance plan for decision-making and groups of operational experts that report up and across. I was the project manager, and in addition to the project team, groups of local acquisitions experts and consultants were brought in or on board to make sure everyone was on the boat and that everyone knew their role in guiding the boat on this adventure. This is the project team, their institutions, and their areas of expertise. These are the project consultants who helped ensure that expertise for the entirety of the collection's lifecycle advised the project team. I included consultants on all messages to the project team, such as weekly updates with action items, as well as monthly acquisitions reports, and consultants were also invited to the project kickoff, a midpoint project check-in, and to provide feedback on key points throughout our work. Our goals were both ambitious and practical. On the collection development side, we wanted to demonstrate that our swirls could make a wave, prove that we could do something future-oriented. On the standing committee side, we wanted to test out the structure of having all parts of a life cycle represented in overseeing a project. We also wanted to know if it was feasible to have a kind of shared blanket order process. With a project team in place, we were finally ready to start working toward the goal of the project. The aim was to establish a pilot book collecting program with GOBI as our agent and Brill as the publisher we were collecting. We aimed to establish a broad approval plan with delivery of books in print and MARC records that integrated with local workflows. The approval light plan was subject agnostic, akin to a frontlist purchases, but with copies distributed amongst our participating members. We asked the project team to produce workflow documentation applicable to IPLC and transferable to local institutions, and also to recommend governance and operating procedures to ensure success and sustainability.
We had not done perspective collecting before. There was no navigation chart for us to follow, but we did have experience in seeking intentional learning, not perfection. And we drew on that idea in formulating a project team charge and a project plan. We knew from the outside that this project was not going to be perfect and that we were going to learn a lot. While we knew we needed to discover and learn, this work was also guided by past projects. We had conducted a dataset feasibility study, which was a pilot where we explored and developed processes for how to work together, as well as how to organize and analyze very messy data. We had an analysis for a collaborative collection development project where we developed a model for determining how many copies and definitions for concepts like strategic duplication. How many copies did we need and from which publishers were some of the guiding questions as we started. Findings from analyzing holdings by publisher and use from one of our analysis projects found that from the sample data, which was single part monographs published between 2013 and 2017, Brill was in the top 10 publishers with the most print holdings access across the partnership, but also with low use. We know that there's a significant number of titles published each year, around 1,400 according to Brill's website. And we knew that Borrow Direct is IPLC's high-speed resource sharing service of physical materials. So using holdings data and Borrow Direct transactions, the analysis found that for Brill, 92% of user need over a 7-year period, which was 2012 to 2019, that need could be met with just 1 or 2 copies of a given title. Whereas 74% of those titles were held by more than 2 libraries, and 58% were held by 4 or more. So using these results, we worked with Galadriel to write a project charter for a collaborative print book collection project that would acquire 2 copies of English language Brill publications that met the non-subject approval plan parameters. This collaborative acquisitions effort short name is the Brill Project, or the Brill Pilot. Since the initial modeling for how many copies needed was limited to Borrow Direct transactions, thus ignoring the local demand, Matt Sullivan, the collection analyst on the Brill project team, replicated the how many copies model using circulation data from the libraries participating in the pilot, and he compared the holdings to determine whether 2 copies would actually be enough. The results found that overall, with the circulation data of 5 institutions, 2 copies would suffice for 94% of the titles and 1 copy for 67%. When adding the Borrow Direct data to the local use, those numbers decreased slightly to 84% and 56% respectively. For additional perspective, it's worth noting that for those institutions that provided holdings as well as circulation data, only around 20% of the titles available during the circulation period were actually checked out. This was 2012 to 2019. We purposely stopped at 2019 so that the impact of the COVID pandemic had on circulation wouldn't skew those numbers. So if it's true, it could be that having more than 2 copies is required only for 1% to 3% of titles overall. In the end, we decided 2 copies would be enough, especially since the purpose of the project is to enable strategic deduplication as appropriate. That is, reallocate funds to increase bibliographic diversity and work to acquire more content from small presses and publishers and by underrepresented creators. Institutions could stop Brill and local approval if they wished and reallocate funds for other collections. IPLC never mandates that members take a specific action like purchasing or not purchasing something, but it's creating the opportunity for those to choose to do so if they want. So I know we're almost halfway through our presentation, and you might still be wondering how our shared approval plan works. But remember those swirls. Remember how they go in different ways sometimes. Galadriel knew that we needed to spend a good amount of time on setting up a process before we could work on actions and get to the outcomes. This quote was and is a good reminder that optimizing for a process that can be replicated is the most efficient way to scale. And we knew that we wanted to make a wave that ebbed and flowed like a tide, not just a one-time tsunami. So we spent a good deal of time setting up a process for meeting our objective of getting to the shared print collection plan. Once we had a process and a project plan in place, we moved to launch the project. At IPLC, we have a set structure for getting final approval and identifying levels of participation. At least 10 out of the 13 institutions need to be able to contribute money and people, or money only, or people only, or just indicate that they support the project in spirit. In addition, we need to have enough money and enough people on a project team. So for the Brill project, we had 6 institutions contribute people and money, and 1 institution contribute just a person. The rest supported us in spirit. So our project team was launched. At a very high level, these are the project mile markers completed during the 18-month project timeline. So we had a project kickoff, we had a collection review and inventory. There was opportunity to do some discovery, investigation, and plan. We moved to make the approval plan with our partner GOBI. Then there was a period of activation where the approval plan was implemented. We monitored and revised the plan as needed. There was a midpoint analysis and review. A lot of documentation was created and plans for next steps. But there was also an 11th part too, and that was one that has become a regular in Gladrill's 8 years of managing IPLC projects. This is what we call the zone of ambiguity, the unexpected or unknown things that we could not have predicted. One, for example, is that the US print distributor for Brill would go out of business in January 2023, which happened to be the same month that we were filing our titles. Or another zone of ambiguity was that we didn't know GOBI couldn't actually auto ship to multiple addresses, and institutions would instead need to firm order from lists instead of having auto shipments. Gladrill has found that naming the zone of ambiguity as something to expect and as a project's adventure, shall we say, helps the project team immensely. It frees us to explore creative solutions to problems rather than feel uncertainty or be embarrassed that we or they didn't know something that they should. And Gladrill, I might ask you to take the next slide. So communicating about a shared initiative to a wide array of stakeholders was challenging. Gladrill, the project team, and the collection development group produced detailed as well as big picture documents to keep everyone on the same page. In addition to the project charter, they wrote a team manual, a workflows manual, and an expectation to establish a basic understanding of our vendor partner. Monthly status updates were provided to key groups. And as the books finally began to ship and be received at libraries, we developed an FAQ document as a way to share some of the details of the project with a wider audience. Daryl, do you mind taking over? I have a little cough.
Not at all. At the project midpoint, we took a pause to zoom in and see what was working in the local context and to zoom out to see what we can make of our swirly patterns. Do we like what we see? Is the wave taking us where we want to go, or should we deploy a life raft? While not everything worked perfectly, no one said we should deploy the life raft. What surfaced in our midpoint analysis was that overall this pilot had a minimal impact on acquisition workflows. There were some smaller considerations to make, like how to manage retention notes and why fulfillment time seemed longer than usual. There were also larger considerations to make, like the fact that members used different discovery methods and systems, and it was hard to uniformly show patrons what Brill books were available for borrowing from other IPLC libraries. Another norm that we have within IPLC and specifically within the collection development group is to embrace paradox. The pilot worked as expected, and it also needed some improvement. The project was big. So many people were involved, but it was also not big enough. It was only one publisher. We kept moving forward. Because words and definitions matter, and from what I've learned during the Brill pilot, I've begun using the phrase the IPLC collection as the proper noun. That is what we're building now. And these definitions of methods for how we're working together to create the IPLC collection. We have collaborative collection, which is centralized collaborative collection development, whereby acquiring IPLC institutions all agree on what will be collected, and retained and where acquisitions are centralized. For example, there is one IPLC GOBI subaccount where acquisitions and record of acquisitions are centrally located. Coordinated collection development is decentralized collection development, whereby acquiring IPLC institutions all agree on what will be collected and retained. However, acquisitions is decentralized and occurs in individual accounts held by each institution. For example, each acquiring institution acquires materials via their institutional accounts and via the vendor of their choice. Based on these definitions of coordinated, decentralized, and local, and collaborative, centralized, and automated, we hoped for a collaboratively built Brill print collection, but we ended up with a hybrid of coordinated and collaborative, a swirl of both. Centralized, there was a single GOBI account for IPLC with titles profiled like an approval plan, but at present, GOBI cannot send shipments on approval plans to more than one address, and we had 6. So the first week of the month, the acquisitions contacts would log into the IPLC GOBI subaccount, select all, and order as if from ordering. Though this is a very quick process, it is another thing to do and adds to the mental and emotional labor of staff and acquisitions departments that have been shrinking over the years. Yet there's also a benefit to this manual step. In February 2024, 263 titles were profiled, which would have cost each of the 2 acquiring institutions around $30,000 for 1 month. This is more than any single institution paid for the entire year of acquisitions in 2023. Because this was not a full approval plan, things weren't auto-shipped and invoiced. We paused acquisitions until we learned what had happened. It turns out that it turns out that only 101 of the titles profiled were published in 2024. The rest were published in 2023, most of them, 1 in 2022, and 1 in 2021. So we worked with GOBI to create folders of only the 2024 titles for the acquiring institutions. For the 160 published last year, we're looking at holdings across the partnership to see if A, we have 2 copies already, and B, if holding institutions are in a position to retain those copies with a 583 retention commitment. For any titles not owned or retained, we will need to review to see whether to add the titles to the IPLC collection. And also at this point, I just want to pause and give a big shout out of appreciation to Laura Zussman-Foss at GOBI for doing such incredible work and being the project manager on the GOBI side as we went on this grand adventure together. When it comes to distribution, we're seeing a pattern that where the most books are profiled in the first half of the year. This is 2023, and that the same pattern has continued in 2024. In terms of distribution between our participating members, those that are acquiring the Brill books, there was some variation depending on what GOBI profiled in a given month and what other projects were happening locally. For example, Johns Hopkins is an outlier here because they were migrating to a new ILS for part of the project, but we came close to an even distribution for the other 5 institutions.
The outcomes at Stanford was that we spent almost the same amount of money we were spending before the Brill pilot, so there was very little change in our budget allocation for Brill. The net effect of the IPLC project for us was movement from receiving individual firm orders and standing orders to receiving a batch of volumes every few months on the bulk order. Overall, we determined that we were saving staff time, even if we were not saving dollars. So as the pilot ended and the project team stood down, another of our meeting norms, commit to non-closure, seemed relevant. We're not sure where we're headed next. For now, the collection development group is determined to continue the shared plan through the end of the year, with local acquisitions contacts continuing to manage the workflow.
And for the morals of our story today, trust, governance, communication, kindness are all imperative. Change is hard, especially a change that impacts long-established workflows as well as institutional independence and autonomy, even when these institutions want to collaborate. The biggest moral, though, is to think big, but start small, because small feels big anyway. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.